but I'm just the chair. I would like to introduce Alejandro Nadal from the Center for Economic Studies at the Colegio de Mexico. Please, Alejandro.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here with you. I'm going to be talking about the economic analysis of legal trade in endangered species. It's work that we've been carrying out in Mexico on reviewing the literature of the last 25, 30 years on the economic analysis of trade and trafficking, and that's what I will be reporting here, and hopefully making some contribution for future work. So just to introduce the talk, biodiversity laws and illegal trade are closely related. Big question, can legal markets reverse a negative trend and aid in conservation? Well, the policy debate needs to be supported by good economic analysis. It's good that we focus on solutions, and I know that is the theme of the symposium. And we need to work with the most accurate analytical tools that are available today. I think this is really imperative because a flawed analysis will lead invariably to wrong policy options. So, as I said, this presentation will rely on our work on a literature review. The objectives are to identify and examine critical problems that are present, and I should say are pervasive in the literature over the last 3 decades, and try to outline some relevant avenues for research and recommendations for policymaking. Some generalities first. I think the policy debate needs to take into account the fact that markets do not behave in accordance to the narrative of textbook economics. We really need to have this point very clearly in the back of our minds when we analyze markets and supply and demand. A big result in economic theory over the last 30 years, this has been well known, okay, is that there is no reason to believe that markets are stable. In other words, that market forces lead to allocations of so-called equilibrium positions in which supply equals demand. That is the main result of the section of economics that we call the stability theory, is that we really have mostly negative outcomes. In other words, there is no theory today that demonstrates, shows, or indicates that market forces lead to equilibrium positions. This is very important, and I will probably return to this point later on. I'm sorry to say this, and I don't want to be rude, but I have to say it strongly. As I put it in red letters, a lot of what passes as serious economics in the wildlife trade literature avoids some very serious and difficult conceptual and empirical questions. Okay, and we need to address those issues and not pretend that they are non-existent or they are going to be going away. A very rapid overview of the literature. I will tell you that the dominant approach in both gray literature, let's say non-peer-reviewed publications and reports by all sorts of agencies, and even the peer review literature, the dominant approach is basically something we call partial equilibrium analysis. I'll explain what this is, and something that we call comparative statics. These are very common approaches, and they are very misleading. Okay, is there a consensus in the literature with respect to the initial question about legal markets and whether they can help reverse the trend of biodiversity loss or wildlife trafficking? There is no consensus, and I think that's a good sign, at least, because trade may have ambiguous effects on poaching and trafficking. All of the great literature, I will spare you the details, is marked by very, very serious problems. Personally, I think it's absolutely useless for policy analysis. Peer-reviewed publications have a better control of theoretical arguments, but very serious difficulties remain precisely because you still have this approach based on partial equilibrium and comparative statics. So let's go into some details now. I hope you won't find this too boring. I promise it will get more exciting as we move ahead. I don't have too many photographs to show, but I'd like to start by talking about what I call the canonical model of the analysis that favors wildlife trade as a policy option for reversing the trend in biodiversity loss and trafficking. So typically, the legal markets argument is justified through the following line of reasoning. Trade bans drive supply and demand underground, prices increase, and you create highly profitable illegal markets. Demand is stable, strong, and growing, and robust, as many analysts say. And I think Tom just pointed out some very interesting things that we need to know about demand. It's not that stable, it's not that robust, it changes through many forces. It's still in the line of reasoning of the canonical model. This is an argument that points in the direction of, hey, you cannot do a lot with demand reduction policies, so let's go back to supply and look at the possibility of legalizing markets. So prices are high in these markets, and demand is price inelastic, meaning that higher prices do not reduce demand. Legal markets can then take control of supply and drive prices down. This is a big assumption. These lower prices will eliminate incentives to poaching. Of course, you need to establish property rights, and legal markets have to be or are more efficient than command and control systems because they are rules-free, eliminate paperwork, etc., etc. Additionally, the revenues that you generate here and you appropriate these rents can be reinvested in conservation. So this is more or less the line of reasoning of the canonical model in favor of legal markets. Let me just point out that this is the way in which the case is presented both in the gray literature, non-peer-reviewed literature and reports, as well as in peer-reviewed literature. So let's take a look at a more detailed look at one example from peer-reviewed literature that I think is valuable because it reveals really the critical weaknesses and problems that you have in a flawed analytical approach that is common to all the literature. So I don't think it makes any sense to look at the gray literature, as I say, or comments in a blog or something like that. Not that I have anything against blogs, but I think it's better to look at the more or well-developed attempts to present the case for legal markets in the wildlife trade, or even present the case against it. And this is the case of the paper by Richard Damania and Erwin Bolte, The Economics of Wildlife Farming and Endangered Species Conservation, published in 2007 in Ecological Economics. So here's a very quick summary. Again, bear with me, some patience. These guys construct a basic poaching model with a typical Schaefer production function, a logistic equation for biological growth. One of the advantages that they have is that they try to open the black box of the supply chain. We've been hearing a lot about supply chains yesterday and today. And Damania and Bolte distinguish between poachers and traders. So that's an attempt to try to unbundle or unpackage the black box that everybody calls supply and demand. Supply chains or value chains. It is rather primitive and crude, but the advantage here is that this is a mathematical model that has equations that allow us to see how poachers and traders interact in this market. Okay, And here, traders are monopsonists. In other words, they are the dominant figure when purchasing wildlife from poachers, but they are price takers in the final market, let's say in Asia, where they have, in the first approach here, they encounter perfect competition. So the traders maximize their payoff functions. The poachers have to adjust with an optimal poachers-traders price. And when legal captive breeding and the legal market are introduced, there is competition between the farmers and the traders in the final retail market. Okay, this competition is modeled through, in this case, through quantity setting, or Cournot type of competition, or through prices. And this is Bertrand type of competition. Okay, two results very rapidly from Damania and Bolte. Proposition 1 and Proposition 2 in their article. The introduction of farmed animal products will reduce poaching if the demand for wild animal products is unchanged and competition in the retail market occurs through Cournot competition. In other words, through quantity setting. Look at the words in red. So, with Cournot competition, you will reduce poaching if the demand for wild animals is unchanged. Okay, that's the first result. Okay, Lemma 2A in their paper, with Bertrand competition, in other words, through prices, competition through prices, poaching levels in an equilibrium with captive breeding will increase, even with no impact on the parameters of the demand function for wild animal parts. Look at the words in red. Poaching may increase or will increase with Bertrand competition. Okay, so we're talking here of a market configuration in which you have legalized supply through farming and competition between traders of poached wildlife or illegal wildlife supply and farmers, leading to an increase in poaching. Okay, so this would be the opposite result that you would like to have. Okay, look at the main results as Damania and Bolte phrased them. Imperfect competition is at the heart of commercial endangered species poaching, and failure to acknowledge this fact could have detrimental consequences for wildlife. This is really very important. This is what I like about this paper, is that these guys are addressing a key issue here in the gap of information that we have. Very little information about the microeconomic structure of the market, and if we don't scrutinize that carefully, we can have some very detrimental effects from the fact that you introduce a legal market in one endangered species. So I think this is a really very important point that they're making, that captive breeding may be detrimental if it induces aggressive competition. And because these are markets and competition takes place in markets, hey, we need really to pay attention to the way in which market structures are really operating in our world today. The picture becomes even more complex because consumer preferences are likely to be unstable. So this is another point that they address. They don't. They only mention it. They don't look at it formally in their model. There are no equations on consumer preferences. But if you add that into their model, you can see immediately that every one of the results becomes worse. And even with Cournot competition, which initially told us that you could have a reduction in poaching. So, okay, so this is a paper that has this sort of conclusion, okay? And I want to now go into a different tack in my presentation and take a look at what's wrong with all of the literature that we have been able to find. And we have right now like 127 different papers, reports, chapters, articles, both peer review and non-peer review, and they all share 7 sets of problems that maybe we could call them the 7 capital sins of the literature, because in a way they are capital because from them, we have a whole set, cascading sets of different difficulties and problems. Okay, very rapidly, this is just the list. The first one is we're talking, all of these analyses, all of them, and this is amazing, are carried out on a partial equilibrium framework. All of them are based on comparative statics. Very little attention to the structure of value or supply chain. Damania and Bulti a while ago being an exception, but still far away from what we really need. All studies and models refer to single product firms. This is really amazing because 99% of companies in the world are not single product firms. I have 5 minutes. I'm really going to have to rush. The channels of competition are ignored. My favorite problem here is the downward sloping market demand curve. Complete ignorance and no attention paid to economic policies. This is very serious. Each one of these problems should warrant thorough revision of methodology, assumptions, and analytical frameworks. Partial equilibrium, I will have to then very rapidly run through or skip the explanation of what partial equilibrium means. It really just says that you're dealing with one market and one product. The problem with partial equilibrium is that you don't know if prices are going up or down. So everybody that comes up here and tells you, oh, well, you know, if we do this, the price will go up. How do you know? Because prices go up and down depending on the constellation of prices in which you're moving. I think David Ricardo said this many years ago. If the other prices are falling at a faster rate, the commodity that you're looking at, the price of that commodity may be in fact going up in relative terms. And this is crucial for the analysis of market dynamics. Also, poaching incentives have to be analyzed in terms of opportunity cost, and you have to bring in the entire spectrum of prices in the entire economy and not just one market. This is really crucial. Get away from partial equilibrium. Comparative statics, this is relying on comparing equilibrium positions. We don't know anything about how markets reach equilibrium, so this is a very dangerous methodology. None of the studies look at what dynamic analysis looks like outside of equilibrium. In summary, these models, because of this lack of dynamic analysis, cannot describe market processes. Many of them talk about Nash equilibrium. I won't bore you with that. I've been threatened now only 3 minutes, so I'm really rushing, and so we'll forget about Nash. But this is a very serious problem. For example, you know, Damania and Bulti say that you know, it is possible to consider the Nash equilibrium within their model. That is quite revealing. It is terrible because there are no natural dynamics leading to a Nash equilibrium. Supply and value chains, again, a big black box. Understandable because these are illegal markets, but still we need to incorporate that into the analysis of price formation. Multi-product firms and scope economies. Very rapidly, scope economies mean that you have a cost structure in which the cost of producing jointly two products is less than producing the same quantity of these two products separately. Okay? This is how crime syndicates operate. We talk a lot about crime syndicates, a lot of evidence. Yes, but we need to understand that crime syndicates are like multi-product firms, and therefore they have access to scope economies, and the implications are vast because they are able to sustain price wars for a long time. And this is something that we need to understand carefully. This is a graph I won't explain. More on scope economies, very important, but we'll have to skip them. Strategic behavior and forms of competition. This is something that is really absent in most of the literature. Cournot, Bertrand forms of competition are really very rudimentary, very crude forms of or attempts to try to incorporate strategic behavior. This is really crucial in our analysis, and it's absent. Demand. Everybody says we have a downward sloping market demand curve. Well, so what? You know, well, so what? That's not true. That's not true. And I'm going to very rapidly jump to this graph. This is how the textbook economics demand curve looks like for one good and one agent. Okay. This is what the true demand curve looks like when you incorporate many commodities and many agents. Okay. I'm not somebody who says this isolatedly. SMD stands for Sonnenschein, Mantel, Debreu. 3 economists, one of them a Nobel laureate, Gerard Debreu, theorems in 1974. What this curve tells you is that there is no stability in markets anywhere, and that the idea that you have a downward sloping demand curve is absurd. The intuition behind this, maybe we can bring it up in the questions and answers session. It's due to the income effects in price changes. So, okay, we are going to respect time, and we're going to skip everything else because I want to get to economic policies. Another big problem. And here, I really cannot be. I wish I was eloquent enough to really make the point strongly here. All of the debate, and even yesterday and today, and I'm really sorry to say so, has skirted around the issue of economic policies. Yes, there is some talk about trade agreements, a little bit about, I don't know, somebody said subsidies or taxes, but by and large, we really are not talking about economic policies. We're not integrated economic policies into any discussion about wildlife trafficking, as if economic policy didn't matter. And hey, I think it matters a lot. Let me move ahead. Yeah, okay. Agricultural policies. Tom, it was great that you were talking about the MIC analysis, focusing on things like poverty and malnutrition, and yes, the site level factors and that work that you were quoting. I think you were quoting this document. Points out in the direction of the need to integrate economic policies. Do you think agricultural policies, monetary policies, fiscal policies have no impact in what we're discussing today? Of course they have. Well, but we're not discussing these policies, and I think that is a big mistake. Macroeconomic policies including, they are all systematically being ignored for many reasons. Governments do not want to open this debate. Maybe that's understandable, most unfortunate, because that's where decisions on resources for environmental stewardship are made, okay? So I think it's critical that we sit at this table and start a conversation on economic policy and sustainability in wildlife trafficking. If we're not sitting on the table, you know what they say. Okay, I have a series of recommendations, and I think they derive from what I just said. If I'm allowed just 30 seconds, I will just pay attention to all of the conceptual analytical points that I mentioned. Okay, get away from partial equilibrium, away from the equilibrium paradigm, away from comparative statics. Get rid of that frame of analysis. As John Maynard Keynes said, you know, the problem is not with new ideas, the problem is with the old ideas that dominate our minds. More serious consideration to economic policies, more attention to hey, there's a crisis going on right now. What are the unemployment rates in Europe? Is anybody thinking that this has to do with how wildlife trafficking will be in the future? What about the role of finance? It's not only the question of money laundering, which has been mentioned a couple of times, and the need to have the banking and financial sectors talking with us about these problems. It is also the issue of the vast amounts of liquidity that have been injected into the financial banking sectors in both the U.S. and Europe as a result of attempts to stem the effects of the crisis. I think these sources of liquidity are going to come back to haunt us for many, many years. This is why I think the whole issue of natural capital gets me very nervous. because there are these very gigantic, majestic economic forces that are there already. And we really need to take stock about the policies that could allow us to respond to capital flows. I think this is really a very important issue. And I think I will close here. There are a whole series of more detailed recommendations. Just one final word. Do not unleash forces that you do not understand. I think that is very important. Okay. Thank you very much.